Apple is in its flop era. Things could be changing sooner than expected at the Federal Reserve, and we are getting closer to the future the Jetsons imagine with each day that passes. But first, my name is Tiffany. I'm a loan officer here in Las Vegas, Nevada. I've helped over 200 families with their real estate needs and would love to help you with yours. This includes things such as buying a home, refinancing, maybe taking out some equity in your home. Whatever that need looks like, I can help you with those. So I'm going to leave my information in the description below so we can connect and see how I can best serve you. As well, I'm a nerd for all things personal finance. So if that's something that you're into, that is what I'm going to be diving deeper into as the videos start progressing. So I would encourage you to subscribe, maybe like this video, and share it with someone who's also interested in personal finance. But now let's get into today's video. Apple just had their WWDC event. This is basically like Apple's Met Gala. This is where Apple is going to show you all of the new things that they have planned for the year to get people excited, start pre-ordering some things, get excited for the new iPhone, get excited for whatever the new products are and the new softwares are, to basically build interest in. However, the event did not go as planned this year. Some things that were mentioned was like a new iPad, which relatively speaking was exactly the same as previous iPads, just newer. There is a mention of a new Apple Watch, which has some cool features, but for the most part is just an Apple Watch. And then their big thing was their iOS 26 unveiling, which was really not spectacular itself. So the look that they're going for is this like liquid glass, like basically just like cosmetic upgrades. They refused to mention anything spectacular with AI. In fact, the brief mentioning that they had of how AI is going to get integrated into this new iOS system was stuff like writing and emojis and helping you write your sentences. Like there was nothing spectacular at all about the use of AI in the iPhone, which has been a big complaint for people as AI is starting to gain more prominence, and especially with some other companies that are doing some more spectacular things with AI. Apple is not innovating here. That would be one thing if, Apple didn't build their whole brand on being innovators. They have basically came in since, the late 2000s, and they were like, we're going to innovate and make this product so good. You're going to be able to replace your camera with this phone. You're going to be able to do everything on this phone. You no longer need separate devices because you can do everything on this phone. And at the time, that was spectacular. That was enough to give them market share. That was enough to make them the superior phone that people go to. But that's not spectacular anymore, especially because everyone has the same accessories when it comes to their phones. Like everyone's phones have cameras. Even the iPhone itself, the camera really hasn't gotten that much better when you look at the current, models versus maybe just a couple models a few years ago. So the camera itself is really not spectacular anymore, which was one of the things that Apple prided itself on. And then as well, the apps and all of the features that people have come to know in iPhone aren't in other phones. So a lot of investors and a lot of people who are Apple diehard fans were really expecting more AI integration with the new iOS software, but they really did not include anything special about it. In fact, the most extreme thing that I see based on the event notes is that they have an integration with ChatGPT, which at least they're trying. But when you look at, some competitors like Google and Microsoft that are actually integrating their own AI into their phones that can do spectacular things, it just doesn't feel up to par, basically. In fact, Google and Microsoft have integrated their own AI system called Gemini into their phone that can, show you where things are from if you just swipe it with your finger. In fact, seeing some of the breakdown of what Google can do, it truly feels like Google is just light years ahead of Apple when it comes to AI integration in their phones. And that's what people were really hoping to see from Apple. They were hoping to see we're on at least somewhat similar grounds as the Google phone. And unfortunately, Apple is just being complacent here. They're not really trying to be innovative, especially because AI is such a buzzword for a lot of people. They're really not taking that to any extremes. And recently, Kathy Woods, who is a financing giant, she is one of the biggest investors and she manages huge hedge funds. She knows what's going on when it comes to markets and what to invest in. And she recently was on the Diary of a CEO podcast talking about brands that she's looking forward to and things that she's really excited in investing in. And she was talking about Tesla in particular, which we'll get to at the end of this video about what they've got going on. But, when asked about Apple, who's been the top of the S&P and top of NASDAQ and one of the biggest companies pretty much for the last 10 years, talking about, is she excited to invest in them? She said no. She said that Apple is too complacent. They used to be an innovator and they used to be ahead of everyone in the space of technology, but now they've kind of relegated themselves into this like, oh, we're kind of comfortable role. Like, people are always going to buy the iPhone. We don't have to worry about it. People are always going to buy MacBooks. We don't have to worry about it. And this is making them very underwhelming when it comes to consumers and what they decide to spend their money on. And this reflected in the stock market the next day after this event. In fact, Apple shares went down 2.47% from the day before once this event unveiled. And the sentiment was pretty much the same from people who were investors, from journalists to basically people online, and it's that Apple is not interesting anymore. Where do I think this is going to go? It's either going to go one of two ways. Apple is either just going to accept the fact that they're going to become like a legacy brand and they're okay with the iPhone as is, and that they might just, upgrade the camera. They might come up with new things and new softwares, but for the most part, they're not really that interested in innovating. And I do think that this is a route that they may go down because they've had some flops already with them trying to be innovators. Like, who remembers the virtual reality glasses? Like, what ended up happening with those? It's because they don't invest in the right things that people would actually feel are essential in their lives, and they're focusing instead on niceties that people may invest in if they have the money, but $3,000 for virtual reality glasses just doesn't make sense, especially when the economy is in a recession. I think that they're innovating in the wrong way, and so I think they may in turn just decide to stop innovating and just focus on what they're good at. But conversely, they can either decide, hey, this is a huge reaction from the marketplace, because 2.47% for a company that has $1,000 shares, like, that is a huge loss in a day. So, I'm sure shareholders are concerned about the longevity of Apple as a brand. So they can also decide to go down the route of trying to mimic Google and their Gemini system and try to integrate that into the next iteration of the iPhone. But if I think they go down that route, it's going to be too little too late. So now let's get into what's happening at the Fed. As you know, at the end of May, there was a meeting between Jerome Powell, who is the current chairman of the Federal Reserve, and Donald Trump at the White House. And if you've been watching some of my videos, you know that these two have not been seeing eye to eye recently. Donald Trump has this very aggressive, we need to bring rates down mentality, and Jerome Powell's like, we're not in a place to bring down interest rates. The economy doesn't justify it yet. So these two have been kind of clashing pretty much for as long as Donald Trump's been in office. We all kind of thought, hey, if they're meeting, maybe there's some progress being made, maybe there is some downward motion that we can project for interest rates going forward. But that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. In fact, there's been a lot of buzzing about who is going to take over for Jerome Powell once his term ends, which, if you don't know, his term ends in May of 2026. And although there is a legal process that has to happen here, like he has to get nominated, he has to get ratified, all of these things, it still feels a little early for us to be talking about who is going to replace Jerome Powell. I mean, we're about a year out, and so why are these conversations happening now? And a large part of it is, there is some turmoil that people are expecting as far as for Donald Trump nominates. Will he pass in the House? Will he pass in the Senate? All of these things. But I think it goes a little bit deeper than that, especially because of the timing of him just meeting with Jerome Powell. I think Donald Trump is trying to send a signal to Jerome Powell that I've already got your replacement lined up, which, even though technically, yes, he is getting replaced in 2026, Jerome Powell's still going to be on the board of the Fed until 2027. You see, just because you're not the president anymore doesn't mean he still doesn't have a voice. All of this could be for nothing, but I think more than anything, Donald Trump is trying to send a signal to Jerome Powell that you are replaceable and that I want you out. And what's interesting here is the names being buzzed about who is going to take over for when Jerome Powell leaves. And the top name that I'm seeing as I'm researching this deeper and deeper is the current Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent. Now, Scott Bessent has been someone who's been behind the scenes making all of the tariff talk work and doing basically everything he can for Donald Trump. But what's interesting here is that him and Elon Musk actually have not gotten along since the beginning of their terms together, especially with Donald Trump fighting. I think this is also a diss towards Elon that, hey, I'm going to put the guy that you did not like in the Federal Reserve because I think you did a bad job, basically. This is twofold, and I think that it's very intentional, and that's why I think the timing of this is very interesting because, again, Elon just basically got out from Doge. He is beefing with Donald Trump. There has been this history with Scott Bessent and Elon Musk of not really getting along, but kind of just playing nice because they were both, reporting to Donald Trump and were both, very high up and with what Donald Trump was wanting. They both were doing exactly what it was he wanted until one of them wasn't. I think that this is interesting in the fact that you've got the whole issue with Jerome Powell and Donald Trump beefing, and then you've got Elon and Donald Trump beefing. So Scott Bessent just seems like the perfect person to annoy both people. There's another name buzzing, and his name is Kevin Warsh, who back in November, when Donald Trump won the election, was starting to make moves into the White House, like who's going to take different spots and who's going to do this and who's going to do that. He was actually the person that Scott Bessent was going up against for that Treasury Secretary role. So for the most part, these men have very similar ideologies when it comes to how they want the Treasury Secretary to run. And it's very likely that if Scott Bessent does move into the Federal Reserve Chair role, that Kevin Warsh would end up taking that Treasury Secretary spot. There's a lot of, movement happening, and there could be some changes happening here soon in the Federal Reserve. With that being said, Scott Bessent is like Donald Trump follower number one. Like, he is truly doing whatever he wants. Like, when it came to the tariff talk and trade talk, he was the person behind the scenes that was making everything happen so that Donald Trump's vision could come to light. He's kind of the man behind the plan, basically. It's not lost on anyone that if Scott Bessent does end up taking over in the Federal Reserve, that we are probably going to see very aggressive rate drops. I think that that is to be expected. Now, whether or not that causes some long-term damage in the economy going forward, that's to be seen. And truthfully, I think that is what would happen, because I do think that we are not in a position yet to lower interest rates, although people want that. I totally get that people want that, but I think the economy has not shown itself yet to warrant lower interest rates. So I do think Jerome Powell's cautionary, approach is the right approach at this moment. What's interesting here is that goes all out the window in May of 2026, regardless of who, Donald Trump ends up going here. He can go with Kevin Warsh, or he can go with Scott Bessent. I think Scott Bessent has proved that he is willing to do whatever Donald Trump wants, so I would be willing to imagine he's the one who ends up getting the job, and then Kevin Warsh moves into the Treasury Secretary role, or, there could be a wild card that comes up. Again, all of this is just speculatory at the moment, but as it stands, Scott Bessent is the front runner based on the reports that I'm seeing to take over Jerome Powell's role in 2026. Last but not least, Tesla is testing out driverless taxis in Austin and is planning to launch them here in the nearby future. Personally, I think we're getting closer to a future where we're no longer driving. In fact, Tesla is not the first company right now to be in testing for these, driverless taxis. There's Waymo that's out in some metropolitan areas in California. Here in Vegas, we have Zoox. So, we're starting to see the rise of these driverless taxis come up, and pretty much all of them are in this testing era. I know Waymo is probably a little bit more advanced because I think they are actually able to start taking rides as we speak. But Zoox is honestly right there with them. I think they're taking rides here in Vegas. They just became the official taxi of Resorts World here. There is forward motion here of these driverless taxis. And what's interesting is that Elon Musk actually just unveiled this driverless taxi in Austin and was basically showing people how safe it was and how it drives very nicely, and that there's nothing to fear with these driverless taxis, which I'm going to insert the video right here.
Musk reposted this video showing one of the vehicles driving on South Congress without anyone behind the wheel. Musk says the Robo Taxis will be geofenced to limit where they operate.
But this goes into the conversation that we were having earlier about being innovators and being, forward motion. So Elon has been working on, the Boring Company for a while and having these underground taxis under Las Vegas and having them operate. And this actually has been working for, the last couple of years that they've been testing. So to unveil this now on the actual grounds that people are using every day is quite a jump from where they were with, the progress that they've made with the Boring Company. But it goes one step further than that. In fact, there's actual helicopters, drones, there's a lot of different companies who are testing right now for these driverless options or pilotless options, which I don't know if I would be comfortable going into a plane that didn't have a driver, but I do think I would get into a car that didn't have a driver, which I don't know what that says about me. But I do think that there's a future here where it doesn't make sense to drive anymore. In fact, in the Diary of the CEO episode that I was mentioning earlier, Kathy Wood was talking about brands that she's very excited about. She mentioned the self-driving facet of Tesla and how they're going to continue to keep innovating and how they're going to continue to keep being ahead of the curve when it comes to technology and being on the forefront of what's new and exciting. And I think what's interesting here is that Tesla has always had this reputation, even though they've gained prominence probably within the last 7 years, they've always had this reputation. When they first came out with the electric car, that was a completely unheard of concept, not needing to put gas in your car. And even though the first iterations are not, as favorable as they currently are, I think that you're going to see Tesla continue to push the envelope when it comes to technology and what we do. I do think that they're going to figure out how to get us all to space. I think that they're going to figure out this driverless taxi thing. They're going to figure out the microchip in your head thing. Like, I think that they're always going to be on the forefront of whatever the technological advance is, whether you like Elon or not. You know, I'm not a pro Elon person myself, but I do acknowledge the fact that he is very forward thinking when it comes to products and development. I think that this, you know, driverless taxi innovation is truly innovative, especially when you think about the cost of like an Uber or a Lyft or just a traditional taxi. You know, when you think about the hierarchy of costs of these, you know, different businesses, typically taxis are on the pricier end, and then you've got like the Ubers and the Lyfts that are a little more cost effective, and then you have just like driving yourself, which is probably the most cost affordable option. Based on the testing that they've done, the cost of these driverless taxis is actually even lower than that of driving yourself. Maybe it costs like $20-$30 for you to take a Uber or a Lyft because it's an actual person that has to put gas in their car and they have to get paid by Uber, and then Uber has people that they need to pay. You know, instead of having all of this overhead at, you know, your dime, basically, Tesla is able to basically figure out, hey, you know, these are our cars, so we don't have to pay for the people in their cars. We don't have to pay for gas because these cars don't operate off of gas, and then we don't need to hire a person. So they're able to save on expenses in a way that truly benefited to the consumer. Instead of paying $20-$30 for an Uber, maybe your Uber is only $5-$6, and I bet you it even goes cheaper than that in the future as you see more competition in the market, like Waymo, like Zeus, etc. I think that we're getting closer to a future where driving is just not even the most cost-effective option anymore. It would make more sense for you to just get this driverless taxi. You don't have to be bothered by someone trying to talk to you. You don't have to worry about someone who's playing the music too loud, and you're able to just truly enjoy yourself in the car and get to point A to point B much more cost effective than, you know, owning a car, paying for registration, paying for insurance, paying for gas, finding somewhere to park, etc. And if we get rid of cars that are needed to park, you know, like, you know, if you have a car and you need to go park at your job for 8 hours, that's a spot. You have to have room for your car to park. So I think that there's a future where you just get dropped off and we are able to better maximize our space because you no longer have to worry about placing a car. And I think that you're even going to see this. I don't think you'll see this for a long time when it comes to like commercial flights, like, you know, Delta, Southwest, all of these things. But I do think that you will see a future here where, you know, a JSX, like I could see them going driverless or pilotless, you know, sometime in the nearby future, which then leads to further iterations where eventually you don't need to pay a pilot, which seems a bit scary because obviously these are a lot of jobs that we're talking about that are at the expense of, you know, just being more affordable. But at the end of the day, those savings end up getting applied to you as a consumer, because if they're not paying for the pilot, then, you know, there's less funds being used in the marketplace. So now naturally they're able to drop their costs and you benefit. So I think that there's a future where this ends up benefiting everyone and it doesn't cost as much to upkeep these things, especially as, you know, AI and technology advances, and a lot of jobs that we currently know them probably aren't going to get paid the same as they are currently being paid. So overall, I think this is a net win, although it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out for the next couple of years. But I would not doubt if by the end of 2025, even start of 2026, we start seeing these driverless taxis that are being used actually on the roads and in our day-to-day lives. So a lot's been happening over the last week, and truthfully, I was equally as interested in each of these stories as I was the other, so that's why I wanted to put them all together here and just give my opinion on what I think is happening, and, you know, maybe see if you guys have any insights about any of these stories, and I would love to maybe chat with you in the comments about it, because truthfully, a nerd for all of these things. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. I would love to know which story you found the most interesting, and if you have any thoughts about any of the stories, let's chat in the comments below. But with that, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!